Welcome to the Simpleton podcast. This is the official podcast of A Simple House. And I am Clark Massey, the founder of Simple House, coming to you from a garage shop in Kansas City, Missouri. And this is my co-conspirator,
Laura. I'm here in the suburbs of DC in my sister's childhood bedroom.
Standing in front of a very nice closet.
Very nice closet. Yep.
Great. All right. What we're talking about today is all the terrible things that are going to happen to your community and the two principles you need to found your community with if you want to have any joy, hope, happiness at all within your Christian community.
Right.
So I feel like Simple House has been a little bit swimming upstream with this. Like our ideas and takes on this are a little bit different. They're not what you're going to find in a normal book on community. We tend to hate those books. And we're also going to go over like 6 pitfalls that will cause you great unnecessary suffering if you don't address.
Yeah.
We'll start with our positive view on community.
Yeah. I've been a part of Christian communities and I've been a part of other communities like sports teams, for instance. And a thing that will distinguish the Christian community and a healthy Christian community is that there's a certain amount of openness. It's open. People can come, they can join in whatever your community is doing. The Christian has like to be focused outward, both on like growing with God and on the other, and that's just part of being a Christian. So the two ways that this gets killed in community is when people have a lot of inside jokes, when they're self-referential, when you are, invite a person into your house and you're talking about weird Catholic memes, or you have kind of exclusive ideas about who's in, who's out, what is the style you like. I
think of like elitism, right? Like you're saying that we should not have like an elitist attitude that's exclusionary and things like this, right? Yet at Simple House, we've always had this joke that we're like the best organization in the world, but it's kind of like a stupid joke. Like we kind of do it as a like funny.
Yeah.
But we also half believe that we are trying to be the best organization in the world.
Yeah. But it's not about like we want to do have the best organization because we not because we want to be the best personally or something. Like we want to be aspiring to sainthood or whatever, but it's not about winning. We joke about winning, right? We joke about being
we
better.
joke about who won morning prayer that morning. Like if someone screwed up in the middle of prayer. But we also joke about like there used to be this group City Year, which was like a government I think it might still be around. It's a government sponsored group that was enormous. Like we were 6 people, they were like 75. Right?
Yeah.
And they'd all wear khakis and have City Year jackets, and they'd show
75 up. In like DC, right? They were all around the country.
Thousands, right? And we're 6 people, just DC. But their headquarters was very close to one of the Simple Houses.
Yeah.
And we would show up at like the subway, and all of a sudden City Year would show up, and it'd be like us 4 surrounded by like 75 khaki wearing red jacket. And we would just like be like at war with City Year in our heads, like we are
our enemies.
I know, right. But we didn't. But we thought it was funny. Like we thought it was funny that we were taking on the horde. But it was like also a little bit of a. I don't know if we want to call that elitism or not, but it definitely had something to do with morale. But anyway, let's get back to your point. Openness.
Yeah, I guess what the elitism is like a problem when you're worried about like what your members are like. Do they have all the sort of right ideas about the church? Do they know, all of this about whatever, the Bible, the Catechism, the last encyclical? And like Catholicism is kind of, it's for everybody.
Yeah.
It's for the dumb person. Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't need to signal your sort of qualifications. Clark and I were talking earlier about fringe groups, and I love fringe group meetings.
Let's time out. I think you were making a very important theological point, and I want to talk about fringe groups too.
Okay.
But like the important theological point is from the very beginning, Christianity said, here's all our doctrines. Anyone can join. You can be the dumbest person in the world and the greatest Christian. there's
Yeah.
absolutely like this unbelievable democratic nature to Christianity, and we're willing
Yeah.
to talk about these doctrines and accept criticism of these doctrines and defend these doctrines. There's not like an initiation where it's like, and now you're an insider and we
Yeah.
will reveal to you the mysteries of our religion. You know,
Right. It's
that is
not
actually a
like,
very common form of
Yeah.
religion that Christianity is definitely not.
right. There is an initiation, but it's like there's no secret knowledge. There's no secret wisdom, right? That you are now initiated to know at certain levels until you get to the next point of initiation.
We're open to share everything
Yeah.
about our faith.
Yeah, yeah. And in a way, it's like, I think like the Catholic Church, in a sense, is like trying to set like a low bar, which sounds like a negative thing, but I'm sort of moved that, you know, the weirdo priest with the crazy theology or the like super boring priest with bad homilies is like still saying the mass. And I think there's like a beautiful, wonderful thing about that. So yeah, I don't know. You don't have to have the credentials. You don't have to, know and say the right things to be.
And then the opposite of this is, this is a mark of a Christian group, is this openness, but it's not necessarily a mark of every group. And I'm not saying the Marines need to be open or something like that, but a Christian group needs to be open. And I think we've all experienced groups that were not open.
Yeah.
I'm thinking you go ahead.
Oh yeah. Well, I love fringe group meetings, and one example is I have been to a meeting of the Mycological Association of Washington D.C., and it was awesome.
So what association?
Mycological, which you obviously are out because you don't know that refers to mushrooms, but and there were
Were you the only girl at that meeting?
No, but I could tell that the younger single men in that meeting were like a girl.
Right.
Yeah. And I've been to other groups like this where it's like, okay, I'm going to share what I foraged this week, and I'm going to use only the Latin names. And if you don't know that, sorry. Yeah, so you kind of like have to sort of show by your seriousness and your knowledge that you are,
you belong, like you can be in that group.
Yeah. And they were really tight. That group was like really tight, right? Like the core group. Yeah.
And you had to like break in. I can think of I do a lot of facilities maintenance, and like Home Depot has like almost everything you need to build a house from scratch. But occasionally there is a piece of plumbing or a piece of electrical that you can only get at an electrical specialty store or plumbing specialty store. Mm-hmm. And when you I'm not really a pro. I'm not a plumber. I'm not an electrician. But I've had to go to these stores before, and like all the other customers are pros. And you just have to be like, I will not be dismissed so easily.
Right.
I do not know exactly what I'm talking about, but you need to listen to me.
Yeah.
I need this part. I cannot leave here without this part.
Right. And the people can get a certain amount of enjoyment, out of being exclusive, and that's fine. That's not, right. But no, the Christian community cannot be that. And a lot of times I think there's like Catholics can be excited, like, oh, you went to this school, you had this professor, or you listened to this thing that I listened to, or whatever. And it's like, you meet a new Catholic and you get excited about finding all the connections, right? And that's nice. But it's like not an appropriate mode for all the time. And it needs to be guarded against, or else it does become like a sort of exclusive club of all the awesome Catholics that know about this and that and believe in a certain way, practice a certain way, whatever. Yeah. And
have certain little pious signals to each other about what they know. Let's go on to the second point. So the first point is Christian community must be open, and you actually need to think about that. It's not something that happens on its own. It's something that certain people are not for initially, and you got to get them for it. Orient the group that way. The second thing, I'll start out by saying, like, one of the most powerful communities I was in that's not Simple House is my grad school program. It was a PhD program, and they accepted 18 people into the PhD program. And unlike most PhD programs, they had a big sorting, where by the end of the year, only about half of those people would be left. And out of the 18, like 4 were Americans, there were Israelis, there were Romanians. I don't know why that was the only Eastern Bloc country represented multiple Romanians. There were Chinese, people from Hong Kong, and some Indians. It was just from everywhere. Some people raised in poor circumstances, everyone coming with a different language, some people very fluent in English, some people not. And we were kind of in this like boat of like, are we going to survive? Are we going to work together to survive? Right? And even amongst the 4 Americans, we were just very different people. And one of my most special lifelong friends is an American from that program. And we're just very different. I'm convinced that like if we ever met in other contexts, we probably would have never made a friendship. But we feel I feel very bonded to him, even though we have very different opinions about almost everything, very different interests, things like that. And the question there is like, what is the magic of that community, and what is the friendships that form in that context? And it reminds us of a friend, one of the first members of the board of Simple House. We both know her, Glynis. And she tells the story that she was in a philosophy class at CUA, and the professor asked, what is the basis of friendship? And, somebody raised their hand and says, common interests. And the professor's like, no. The next person like, they enjoy spending time together. The professor's like, no. And like, they kind of go through a few things, and there's some silence, and Glynis raises her hand and he goes, yes. And she very kind of seriously says, a shared experience of suffering. And he goes, yes, that is the basis of friendship. And I think this is true. I actually think that friendship is something that happens and community is something that happens when you have an exterior goal, a goal that's not community, a goal that's not friendship. Like, we're going to win this battle, survive this program, pass this test, help the poor, feed the hungry.
Yeah.
And when you work shoulder to shoulder with someone towards this exterior goal, you create this like camaraderie.
Yeah.
And this bond.
Yeah.
And this bond seems to be stronger than a bond of common interest.
Yeah, one thing that this reminded me of Glynis's classmates was about this. Pope Francis made a distinction in Fratelli Tutti about the associate versus the neighbor. And what he described as the associate, I think, is what we would kind of normally think of as like a friend, the person that you do activities with, the person that you have common interests with. And the neighbor, he uses the example of the Good Samaritan. And he was talking about the neighbor being something deeper than the associate. So, the neighbor puts himself out for the other neighbor. The neighbor suffers for the other neighbor. The neighbor has to, work out the uncomfortable neighborhood boundaries.
Right.
Raise your yard with the neighbor. Whereas the associate, you may lose that common interest. And then is the friendship still there? Maybe not. You may not. And it's like the neighbors, if you think of a neighborhood, you have like the neighbors working together in a sense of like, you want to have a nice neighborhood. So, but the neighbors are all different, This is
I live in a transitional neighborhood that has a lot of diversity and a little bit of a crime problem. And like my neighbors are Vietnamese, Italian, hipster, Hispanic, African immigrant.
Yeah.
And African American.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, old and young. And they all kind of have different ways. Like, we have kind of like Hispanic barbecue type parties with loud music. The Vietnamese community has this house on our street that is a party every Friday night with like karaoke. You can smell like the food way down the street. They put a tent in the front yard. And it's just like, well, that's all great until it's annoying.
Yeah.
But we're all like, but the real thing has to be that we're in it together, that we are like going to look out for our neighbors on crime and, make sure we're somehow getting along. And somehow there's a common bond there that I value. Yeah. I value my role in it. I value what they do for me, in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So, So I think what this kind of comes down to is also why soldiers and veterans have camaraderie and community, is that they fought for a common goal, and then 20, 30 years later, they like are getting together, and it's just like they feel a bond. You know, they have that community. And there's
even when that common goal is like some of the most painful, damaging memories of their life, right? Yeah.
Right. Like things you might want to forget, you know?
Yeah.
And even like more silly things that aren't like war, but just like rugby. Like my dad's in a nursing home and has kind of lost his memory and his ability to recognize me, you know? But like his rugby buddies are still visiting him, and it's like ridiculous to me they're doing this. I just can't. I'm so impressed that community multiple times a year comes to his nursing home and hangs out with him and gives him gifts and things. And it's somehow that whatever that experience they had playing rugby together 40 years ago bonded them. You know, he just got inducted into the Hall of Fame for a little college rugby team, and it was like really cool to see the community, you know.
Oh wow, that's cool.
For something as kind of silly, like even the rugby Hall of Fame thing was called a janquet. It was a janky banquet. So it's just like totally ridiculous. But why are you honoring 75-year-old dudes? You know, and it was just impressive. So I also see. I think the main point has already been said, which is have an exterior goal that will form your community. Without an exterior goal, if your goal is community, I think you're screwed. Yeah. Frankly.
An exterior goal. And also this is like what the rugby thing points to. It's like something that you're working hard at, something that you sort of sacrifice for, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And you even see something funny where like, I'm always amazed at like these videos on YouTube of like Vietnam veterans going to Vietnam now and meeting people who were their enemy, and they're not trying to do something profound. They're just getting tours, and they're like appear to be getting along great with guys that they were trying to kill and may have dehumanized, you know, during the Vietnam War, and they're both appear to be friends now, you know. Yeah. And you can also see this blew my mind, was like, you can get these old photos from the late 19th century, like 40 years after, I think early 20th century, late 19th century, like 40 years after the Civil War's over, of like Confederate soldiers and Union soldiers eating picnics at Gettysburg together, socializing.
Yeah,
you know?
That is so bizarre. Yeah.
It is so bizarre. But it's like, it's a sign that there's something there that we need to learn, you know? That they went from trying to kill each other to friends. And I don't think they did it because they're trying to be hippies or prove a point. Not that there's anything wrong with hippies, but they're not trying to like, look how cool we are, I've forgiven you. No, they're just getting along and want to see each other, you know? All right. Are we ready to go for the things that will cause you great pain and purgatorial experience in this life in your community?
Yes.
The pitfalls of community, the disasters of community. All right, here's the 6 things that you should avoid when thinking about your Christian community. The first one is my point, which is community is like happiness. If you try to be happy, you can't be happy. And you also can't just force people to have community and have forced fun is another word for it.
Forced hangout time is what we call it.
Right. I always knew that this was cringeworthy in my own life, but it took Thomas Merton talking about it for me to get it. Thomas Merton has these books, which are okay, and I don't really read his books that much, but what he really had that really influenced me was you can get a recording of his novitiate trainings at Gethsemane Monastery, where like they recorded him giving classes to the novices on church history and monastic life and things like this. And in one of those recordings, he talks about how in Vatican II, there was a shift towards community, and a lot of religious orders, as a response to that, started having community nights. And he goes, and it's like they want you on a Tuesday to show up at 6 and have fun. And you better have fun because this is community night.
And you better be happy.
Better be happy. And it just never works. You know, it's never as fun as it should be. And there's something related to this. I feel like there must be an idiom for this, but I can't get a perfect one. But it has to do with like the most fun almost I've ever had in my life are these like spontaneous moments. Like the best sports moments of my life weren't like the organized sports moments. They were weird things like one night we played cricket in the grad school offices, right? Like we took chalk, drew a wicket on a door. We're throwing a cricket ball down, this hallway that had cinder block walls, like a typical like old school college hallway, right? And we had guys jumping out of office doors trying to catch the ball, jumping out of the coffee nook. And it was like the most fun evening we started playing at like 9:00 at night because no one wanted to keep studying. And it was just like me and a bunch of Indian guys. I can't believe how much fun that was. Everyone had a blast. And then we tried to recreate it.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah. We tried playing it again the next week. It just wasn't much fun. It's like if you have a romantic date or something, or you're out with your husband or whoever, wife, and it's perfect. And then you go, all right, great. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go to that restaurant, drink that wine, it'll be great. This is now what we're doing, right? And it just doesn't ever live up.
Yeah. And people, there were like years where people were like, oh, it's very important that you have the community dinners, and we were like, is it? Maybe we should. We don't really want to,
Right.
And one thing in our ministry, it's like you're working together. You live together, you work together all day, and then you want to have like forced dinner together. That's kind of painful. But I have really great, wonderful memories at a Simple House when like a dinner together just sort of happened and everyone pitched in and it was awesome. And it was like the most fun night,
Right. And we had people joining our ministry, particularly early on, who had already been in other communities, like they'd been in L'Arche or a Catholic worker. And I remember they'd come and they'd kind of be like, that last community I was in wasn't working well for me, and this and this and this and this. And they're great. Then they'd be like, well, what do you think we should change here? And they'd be like, oh, we need to do more community stuff. And I'd be like, really? Like, did you like that old community that was having the forced dinner? And he's like, no, community was pretty tense. And I'd be like, but do you like our community now? And they're like, yes. And I'd be like, but you want us to adopt those ideas, because those ideas sound great, but in practice, they're just not great.
Yeah.
And I think Thomas Merton's the one who, for me, just still summed it up right. Forced fun just doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
This next point is meaningful to me, and it may be totally stupid to everyone else. Community is like the Eucharist. The Eucharist, there's nothing better. One of the weird things that comes about because of that is you can go to a talk on the Eucharist, and I've been to a couple of these talks where they just are like, the Eucharist this, and the Eucharist this, and there's nothing better, and really, what greater thing could you do than adore the Eucharist? And they go on and on, and by the end, you're like, if I believe everything you said, which I kind of do, because I can't contradict anything you said, I should be an anchorite, and so should every Catholic. And anchorites, in case people don't know, it's like in the Middle Ages where you'd like build your bedroom, your room that you lived in, onto the church with a window to look at the Eucharist all day, and you stayed there all the time, right? You were a hermit inside the church, essentially, right? And this has fallen out of vogue. There aren't many anchorites left now.
Are there any?
But I every once in a while hear of one. I don't know if they persevere, but but like people will also talk about community in the same way, where it's like community is the Trinity. Community is God. Even God is community. There's nothing higher form you can do in your religious life than community. And the more they're talking about it, the more you're like, all I need to be doing is community all day long. And clearly I don't even know how to disprove that. It's like with Eucharistic adoration where why don't we all just all sit in the middle of a church with multiple altars with mass going on simultaneously and just take the Eucharist all day long? Like when you're done with one mass, you're shifting to the next direction, getting the next mass. And clearly that's not what the Christian life's all about. But it's hard not to say that,
Right. The interesting thing is like, let's do community. Okay, go. Can you do that? Right. But it's like, well, let me, feed my children breakfast and let me go drop them off at school and see the other parents. And let me, go. And if you kind of carry on with your day, there's a lot of communing that happens.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And it's also about it, what it really is an over idealization, right? And if you have someone who's starting a community or in your community who all they do is talk about the beauties of community, just beware. It's kind of like people who aren't married talking about what marriage is and its perfection. And marriage is everything that they say often, but marriage is also a struggle. It's often, you're going to work through not only your issues, but their issues. And you're going to like it's all these other things besides just, this wonderful love where you're getting along all the time,
Right.
It's also bad breath. It's also farting.
I think
it's all these things,
As people in college that listened to a lot of Christopher West and got married shortly thereafter were a little disappointed,
Well, what's worse is when you meet them in the first couple years of marriage and they're still acting like it's all exactly the way they thought it was going to be. And they're kind of giving marital advice there and you're like year 2 and you're like, okay,
Yeah, you have this sort of idealization of community, and a danger is like when you can use community as a way to live out some kind of strange codependence or something, where you need your community people to be like your best friends, your social group, like super emotionally available all the time. You're all doing the same prayers together, and this is weird and inappropriate. And I think it is a great way to make everyone in the community unhappy.
And I think we've just moved on to the next point, by the way.
We're moving on to the next point. Yeah.
Codependence in community is not good. So, but what are you saying where it is good if you emotionally connect deeply with someone in your community, in a friendship or whatever, that's all good. The problem is when you either need it or expect it or act like everything's a failure when you don't get it. Am I saying that right?
Expectation, and even like a spouse, you can't expect them to be emotionally available 24/7, right? At some point, you're like, I gotta get some work done, and I gotta do the dishes, there's an idea that you are gonna have this sort of deep desire fulfilled that is not actually something you can put on a person, and not even a collection of people in a community, right? And I think another thing that bothered people about the way we were doing things in the beginning at a Simple House, which has turned out to be really good, is like we encourage people to have friends outside, have hobbies outside. And I think it's like really healthy to work through like, oh, this person I live with doesn't want to be my best friend. That's okay. Right. So, right. Don't be codependent. Related to that, I think another point is to not let the community be your identity. And I see this all the time. I think people feel isolated. I think they feel like they don't have like a context that gives them meaning, not just Christians, like everyone. I think people are like struggling and yearning to find an identity. And I see this like on paleo community forums. My friends that do CrossFit say this is like, you go to a CrossFit gym and these people are CrossFitters, and they finally have found their identity. How long that identity will last, I don't know, but like as Christians, we do not need to find our identity because we know our identity, and that is like child of God, there's
something both immature about it that's bad for the community, and it's a huge turnoff to outsiders. Yeah.
And it's something like you don't know who you are, so you need to have somebody say who you are for you.
Right.
And you'd spend all this time like signaling like, I am part of this community,
And I think this is true even in religious orders, because in religious orders, they clearly signal what community they're in. They're wearing a habit. Right. They're like, it's very clear what community they're in. But the great, nuns and monks and friars and all these things are the ones who you meet them and it's clear that they are authentically themselves. They're not relying on their habit. The habit is useful and good, but it's not like an identity that they're wearing, shall we, right? And it's kind of weird when you meet like often young people who have joined religious orders who are like, well, the Franciscan way of doing this is XYZ, or the
Yeah.
Dominican
Yeah.
way is, this, or of course I would want this because I'm a Dominican, and you're just like, well, come on, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And,
But-
I don't know. I think this is also related to the codependence, but like, I don't know. Have you ever had like someone, not like a person you're dating, have you ever brought like a friend to a party or something, and it's like they're relying on you to like let them have fun at the party or something, and it's like terrible.
Right.
And the thing I think that happens is like that person is expecting, with the codependence, like they're expecting something from you that's like not appropriate to give, but it's like there's like a thing that's like, no, we're together, right? Like we're in the same group. And I think that often when that person is actually like overstepping a boundary, but it's like the person that is being depended on like feels like terrible, like, oh, should I be, more available to this person? Should I be in charge
Right.
of this person having fun at the party? Because often I think the desire for the community and this shared life sounds so romantic and kind of right that it's hard to refute, that you shouldn't be doing these unhealthy behaviors.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go on to the next one, which is something that's plagued me and plagued other people in our community, is that like, if you started, I feel like all of our podcasts are a little bit for someone who wants to start their own Catholic mission,
Yeah.
which is fine, which I feel like I'm speaking to Clark Massey 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You get to the point where like you're in your campus group, or you're in your mission, or you're in your parish or community, and you're fulfilling a certain role. You're working so hard, you're outreaching, or you're whatever your role is, right? And then you start looking and judging the other members of your community based on that, like based on you as a measure, basically. Like, well, you don't do as much, or you don't do this, or I know you're doing that, but you need to be contributing more over here, right? And I used to get caught up in this, and I had to have this like kind of get smacked with this in the sense of it's almost like we're a baseball team, and it wouldn't be good if everyone on the team was exactly like me.
Right.
Like, I'm performing a function. I am like the catcher.
Right.
If we were all catchers, the baseball team's going to suck.
Yeah.
I need a shortstop. I need a second baseman. I need a good hitter. I need a good pitcher. I need people of different talents, of diversity, of different types, right? And therefore, comparing them to me and what I do is like completely destructive to the functioning of the community.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a little bit of that's also that at some level, communities kind of bring everyone along. We're going to talk about this later in Simple House, like how we train missionaries a little bit, but like it's a convoy, right? The problem with a convoy is the ships have to go the same speed, even though there's some fast ships and some slow ships. You're always going only as fast as the slowest ship, right? And you need to somehow break out of that to let the fast ships go fast and the slow ships go slow, and it allows that kind of diversity in the community that you need, where you're not all catchers.
I think right, breaking out of the convoy, but I want to but the ships are like all going to the same place or something, right? Because it's like you want to have the mission of the community, like pulling people along, right? Like maybe the person that's less wanting to wake up early or something.
Convoys pull people, but they also hold people back.
Yeah.
And you want to kind of you want to figure that out to where you're getting the pull that you want, but you're also not holding anybody back.
Right.
Yeah. And this is a very complicated problem. Religious orders deal with it. Like I remember I talked to a guy. I'm probably going to tell this story 5 times over the whole course of our podcasting, but I talked to a seminary president, and he was like, if St. Francis showed up to our seminary, we would have a problem. Meaning like if he became a new seminarian, St. Francis, he would not fit well, because they were running a certain program, pulling some people forward, holding some people back, and St. Francis would be like running naked around and doing weird St. Francis stuff, and he'd probably get kicked out. You know what I mean? For his holy craziness, which is great. Yeah. And that's that's why St. Francis might be the greatest saint, but it's like, doesn't work well in all seminaries,
Yeah.
You got the last point. The last thing you need to avoid.
yeah, I feel like all my points are a little bit related. But if you're starting a community like ours, where you have people in and out that are volunteering, or if you're in a volunteer program, that's for most people that go through a short phase of your life, you can't give yourself fully to that thing 110%. You can't expect your community members to be doing that. It's appropriate to give yourself fully, like in marriage, to give yourself like as fully as you can to God, to give yourself fully in a religious order, which is essentially your new family, but like a volunteer organization or missionary organization that is lay is not something that you can like kind of vow yourself to.
Yeah, well, one, you're just not allowed to vow yourself to these things, except, I mean, you can vow yourself to marriage, but even then the church makes you jump through hoops, and
right.
like,
and so it's interesting that you can't vow yourself
yeah, you can't
to
just go get married tomorrow, and same with like joining a religious order. There's many years before they let you vow, but like, I think what we're saying more generally is not just don't vow, but we're saying that be very realistic. The term 110% is inherently unrealistic. Yeah. It means more than everything, and you can't give more than everything, right?
Yeah, and you can't even give everything, because if you're like in your young 20s and you volunteer for 3 or 4 years, you're still maybe trying to meet a future spouse. You're still got to have some angle for your future career, right.
Or even if you were an athlete or something and you tried to do everything to get in the NFL, that's inherently just not good. What am I trying to say here, though? There's something about it where sometimes when young people are more prone to try to throw themselves in unrealistically, but there's also this issue of like, when you get a group together and you're trying to launch something new, a community or a project, there's a lot of people saying how much they're into it. They're like signaling to each other how much they're into it. Like, we had some friends who were thinking about starting a maternity home, and they kind of had this problem that they were like, oh yeah, we'll all do this and it'll be like this. And it'd be like, just a second. Can you realistically give 2 years out of your life to this? Realistically, or 1 year or half a year?
Well, it's like, maybe it would have been seen as a negative to like, count the cost of opening this ministry, right? Like, say like, okay, well, it's going to require this amount of time, and the amount of time I have to give is, this, because I am also taking this grad school class. So can I do this? Can I not do this? Right.
I can't be all in grad school, all in running a marathon, and all in founding this thing. There has to be, and Jesus speaks to this in the Gospels. He talks about how before you build a tower, you're going to count the number of stones. Yeah. I'm not saying it exactly right, but you're a fool if you start building the tower and halfway through you're like, oh, I didn't even have enough stones. Ha ha, But this happens like whatever new projects start in your parish or wherever, we all talk about them like, I have all the energy in the world,
Yeah. Right.
We're trying to do this thing at Simple House now. We're starting a new ministry called Just Homes, which is taking the apartments we have for the homeless and kind of spinning them off into a new ministry, so that the Simple House missionaries aren't having to do the maintenance and all the, upkeep of these things, right? And I remember I approached some men in the community to take it over, and they were very open to it. I think they were all good guys, and they saw the real value of it. And after meeting a few times, they said, we're not going to take this over. We're not going to start this new ministry. Yeah. And they go, for one reason, look how hard it was for us to even meet to decide whether or not we were going to do it. Yeah. We just don't have the time. Yeah. And I'm like, they were kind of worried about letting me down on it. And I'm like, no, I mean, I'm very thankful that they realistically looked at their time and said, we just can't,
Yeah. Yeah. So. And, the other thing is that it's like, it feels like a virtue to say you're like, to have the person that's in 100%, and that person can be a pain sometimes.
Right.
And it's, you don't want a person overtaxed, overburdened in the community. Yeah.
Let's wrap this up with the last thing, which is kind of a thought on Saint Benedict. So just very factually, St. Benedict has the most successful rule for setting up a community ever, of any, denomination, society, anything. And if you read that rule, one of the things that's going to strike you is how unbelievably practical it is, and how it was not written the first day the community started. There's something about when you're starting a new project, mission, whatever, it's in its fantasy stage. It's in its idea stage, right? That idea's got to meet reality. It can't remain fantasy. If it remains fantasy, you're going to have a bunch of people walking around in denial, a bunch of people pretending they're happy when they're not, a bunch of people, just not living in reality. It's not going to be an authentic program, And so you need to resist making a bunch of decisions when you're in the fantasy idea stage. You need to start your program and start creating rules as needed. Almost minimize the number of rules, but start creating your rules as you learn that you need rules. I'm thinking like in Saint Benedict's writings, it's like he tells people, don't sleep with your knives. Sounds like he learned that the hard way, right? There's also a long part in Saint Benedict's rule about porters, like how important it is to have a nice guy greeting people at the door of the monastery. And that they had some bad porters, and that's why he wrote that, And another thing that kind of has always been scary to me, but I think we talked about the church sex abuse crisis, was like St. Benedict writes about not having kids around the monastery and rules if they are, and exceptions and things, as if it was an issue that they needed to deal with. And if you go read the Desert Fathers, they'll say like, don't let boys in the area, they'll say things like, don't let a man with a woman's face in the area. He's not talking about transgender or cross-dressing. He's talking about someone who didn't grow a beard. Like, don't shave your face and walk around the desert, because it was causing, it's just weird that saying of the Desert Fathers, which clearly had to do with some sexual improprieties and managing that, has been handwritten and passed down to us 1,500 years later, because apparently it was important, even though it's embarrassing that that's important, right? And it was kind of like our naivety and not taking those things seriously kind of started leading to the church sex abuse crisis, in my opinion. Right. But I guess at the heart of all that I just said is that practical. Not idealistic, but practical.
As the need arises, right? Because that's how you can make rules that make sense for your particular community, right? You don't copy somebody else's rules. You say, oh, turns out for our community, it makes sense for us to meet at 9:30 and say morning prayer together. That arose out of necessity. Yeah. Right.
Well, great. I hope everyone has great Catholic community. Please subscribe to our podcast. Share it if you can. Visit our website at asimplehouse.org. I hope you found a good community that doesn't fall into these horrible, painful pitfalls. Don't get discouraged if it does. You're going to fall into one if you have a Catholic community.
Yeah, at least.
At least. But the better you can identify them, talk about them with others, and get beyond them. Giving these things names is what's important.
Yep.
Because once you have a name for it and a concept for it, now you can tackle it and talk to other people about it. Not talking about it will be the downfall of your community.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. God bless.
All right. Thank you, Clark.
Good to talk to you, Laura.
You too.
Peace out.
Bye.